This is the first volume in Bruce Catton's trilogy on the history of the Army of the Potomac. It basically covers from the time when McClellan took command and formed the Army through the time after the Battle of Antietam when McClellan was relieved. And there are a number of takeaways that I got from this book. First off, the writing is absolutely beautiful. The way Bruce Catton writes, it's to me, it's compulsive reading, absolutely compulsive. You can't step away from this book for too long. The second thing about it is that he has unrestricted praise for the ordinary common soldiers in the Army of the Potomac. And he points out these are the guys who are going to go ahead ultimately and defeat Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. What they needed was decent command, but even at the start, when most of these guys were really hardly trained, really didn't understand quite what they were doing, these guys were into it. Now, what happened with the Battle of Antietam was that the blush came off the rose in terms of how attractive or glorious serving in an army as a private soldier was. But nonetheless, these guys, for the most part, stayed with it and ultimately won. And my glasses are fogging up here. It's kind of a steamy day down here in Florida. The second thing that comes across in this book is a relatively balanced picture of McClellan. He points out, and praises McClellan's good points, his ability to organize, his ability to inspire men, inspire loyalty, and so on. On the other hand, he balances it with his inability to act very aggressively, whether it was in the 7 days in the Peninsula campaign or in the Battle of Antietam itself. From the time he picked up that package of cigars, he had the opportunity, if he moved fast enough, to really, really destroy the Army of Northern Virginia, and he just plain didn't. And he also criticizes him, I think, fairly, for his inability to have a hands-on approach to the management of the Union forces in the Battle of Antietam. Now, and I would say that the third thing that I took away with this was a new appreciation for the Battle of Ball's Bluff. I had always regarded that as a kind of a really minor encounter between the North and the South. Certainly a victory for the South in this thing that was not a whole lot more than a raid or a skirmish, whatever you would want to call it. But what happened, and once again, I think Bruce Catton does a great job of explaining this, is because this guy Baker, Senator Baker, was killed in that battle. Now, he wasn't the Union commander. He was commanding a kind of a regiment that was supposed to reinforce the guys who were initially engaged. But what that did was to trigger Congress to create this committee charged with the oversight of the war. And what they proceeded to do was to, micromanage, second-guess everything that Lincoln and the generals in the Army of the Potomac were doing, and they applied an abolitionist lens to the selection of commanders. And Bruce Catton points out that the Union generals who ultimately won the Civil War, Grant, Sherman, Sheridan, those guys, none of them started out the war as particularly pro-abolition or particularly anti-slavery. They kind of took what they saw, but the thing was that they applied purely military and not political considerations to their management of this army, the Army of the Potomac. And really, that political influence really damaged the North's ability to deal with Lee and the South. Now, I have to say I put that book down, thoroughly enjoyed it, ready to go on to Volume 2, Glory Road. I'll probably give it a little bit of a break, but Bruce Catton really is great. I loved rereading Stillness and Appomattox a few months ago, and I'm really enjoyed rereading Mr. Lincoln's Army. That's my recommendation for this week. It's an old book, but if you're a Civil War buff and you haven't looked at it in a while, you might find it very enjoyable indeed. See you next week.